Good morning and welcome to the Pod Bible podcast. Everybody who's listening in the morning, let's hear it for mornings. Yes, I hope you're all feeling fresh. If you're listening in the afternoon, you might be a bit sluggish. Maybe you're doing a bedtime listen. There are all kinds of different times when people listen to podcasts, right? That is the beauty of them. You don't have to tune in at a particular time like you do with a radio show. You just listen when is convenient for you. If you can hear some noise in the background, it's seriously windy. I don't know if it's been seriously windy by you, but right now my little office outside in my garden is struggling to cope. So I may well get blown away. So let's speed things up a bit, crack on with what we're doing. Did I say my name is Adam Richardson? I should have. I am the editor of Pod Bible magazine and one of the co-founders, and I'm delighted to be here today because not only do we have three great guests on the Pod Bible podcast, but also we've got a brand new magazine out right now. It came out yesterday. If you're listening on the Monday, it was issue 16 and it features our brand new cover star, Blind Boy, who of course hosts the wonderful, entertaining, fascinating and hugely educational The Blind Boy podcast. Now, if you don't know about that podcast, what are you doing? But by all means, go and have a read of the brand new magazine. It came out with the Sunday Times yesterday. 45,000 issues went out around the country. And it's available at podbiblemag.com if you want to read it, if you want to order it to your door. We've also got a video, which, let me think. Yeah, will that be out now? I think it will be out now. If you have a look at podbiblemag.com, it may be that it's coming out a little later today. But there will be a video of a little interview, a chat that Stu Whiffen and Scroobius Pip, the other two co-founders of Pod Bible, had with Blind Boy himself. And it was a great video, a great chat, and it's available on our website. That's the brand new magazine. As I said, it's got Blind Boy in it. We've got an interview with Alice Levine, of course, very famous for her podcast, My Dad Wrote a Porno, but she's got her own new podcast on Audible, which is called Very Modern Quests, which is really funny and a really cool idea. We have an interview with Oti Mabuse, who is, of course, a fantastic dancer on Strictly Come Dancing, but she has her own show now as well. And who else have we got? We've got the chef, Simon Rimmer, from Sunday Brunch. He picks out his top 5 podcasts. We've got an interview with the team behind Case File, which was very exciting because they are an absolutely huge podcast. They have an anonymous host, and we ask some questions about that, about the show, about true crime in general. So again, another one that I think a lot of our listeners will enjoy reading. Basically, we've got loads of good stuff in this magazine. We've got reviews, we've got recommendations. I listened to a load of different podcasts for this mag, and I wrote about quite a few of them, but we've got loads of other writers involved as well, and it's great. So hopefully I've persuaded you enough to go and have a look at it, podbiblemag.com. All right, back to the podcast. That's what we're really here to do. Last week, a couple of weeks ago even, issue 87, we had the MMA Fan podcast. Blake Harrison, one half of the MMA Fan podcast, was here to talk all about that. And then we had recommendations from DJ Semtex from Hip Hop Raise Me and Mariah, who is one of the many members of the Touchline Fracas team. This week, we've got something a bit different. We don't have recommendations because there's a new magazine out. So if you want recommendations, go and have a read of that. Instead, we've got 3 different groups of podcasters, 3 different shows talking about their show and telling us why they think it is worth listening to their podcasts. And we're going to kick things off with a returning guest, Jade Adams, who has been on before talking about a musical. She is here to talk about It was new when we recorded the chat. It's not as new now, but it's still fresh and well worth a listen. She's talking to Stu Whiffen all about Laughable.
Hello, Jade Adams.
Hello.
Please tell me all about your new podcast.
The Laughable podcast is your newest favourite news-based podcast. We started this because the 3 of us are actually genuinely friends. So it's hosted by me, Jade Adams, and Red Richardson, who's a comic, and another comic. We're all great mates, Garrett Millerick. And it's all come from the fact that the 3 of us love talking about what's going on in the world, but obviously in a sort of funny way. So we stay away from any divisive subjects. So things like Trump or Brexit or how bad the government is right now. We stay away from all of that, and we only bring you the stories that normally fall down the back of the sofa. Now, the most interesting thing about it is that the 3 of us all come with our own areas of expertise. Now, obviously, I love all things showbiz. I'm also very showbiz as well. So I bring all the celebrity stories. Red loves reading the tabloids. He brings all the red tops. And then Garrett, as the only person with a subscription to a newspaper, he brings all the broadsheets. So we've got a sort of very diverse interest in the podcast. So it keeps it, we just hope it's one of those podcasts that everyone can enjoy rather than a certain group of people, you know?
And so how did you end up working out who was going to do the podcast? Was it something was you approached, or did you approach somebody? Like, how did the whole kind of like the team come together?
Well, genuinely, we're all friends, and all of us, like Red and I met after Garrett and I. So Garrett was friends with both of us through comedy, but I knew of Red and really liked the cut of his jib anyway. But we've obviously got closer during the pod. But Garrett had this relationship with us, and he approached both of us and said, why don't we do a podcast together? I think we all have a very distinct voice, and they're different from each other. And I think we know how funny our chats are with each other. And we were like, is this something where we can like sort of turn this into a format? So it actually took us 6 months to come up with the pod. We did loads and loads of hours of recording. I think we ended up doing about 7. We used to meet completely socially distanced as well. We used to meet in a studio in town. No one will ever hear any of those because we were just working it out. But we took a really, really long time because it's important. We wanted to make sure that it was right and the format was great because we want to make a successful podcast, and it has been so far. We're absolutely thrilled with how well it's been going.
So talk a little bit about the format of it, Jade.
As I said, it's the three of us with our own areas of expertise. Garrett brings all the stories from the broadsheets. And what's really funny about that is whereas I'm explaining to him what a Kardashian is, he has to explain to me what Dominic Cummings is. And then Red turns up. Not only does he focus on the sort of tabloid areas, because those, I'll be honest, are the funniest headlines. I think one we had ages ago was man gets bummed to death at Safari because he wears Newcastle United football shirt on the trip.
Rough day.
Really rough day. And so obviously those titles are really, really funny. We come and then we dissect them between us. And obviously all of us are successful comics. So the conversation's, very fast, very quick. It's normally 30 to 35 minutes per episode. So it's a nice short burst of something really, really funny.
And also, I mean, the fact that it's based around news feeds, would you say that the sort of content of the podcast is sort of date sensitive? Or is it something, if you was to advise listeners to go and get involved in it, would you say go to the very beginning, or would you say drop into this week? Is how relevant is the kind of the news story to the time?
I mean, there is a slight topical element to it, but we do use stories from the past if we find them and they've got a funny enough headline, but we do try and keep topical. Well, whilst we're speaking at the moment, what's happened is Kanye and Kim Kim has finally come out and she's talking about her divorcing Kanye, and the record that we had yesterday, this sort of trended on Twitter as the podcast was recording. So I sort of popped off, obviously went to the toilet with my phone and was reading on my phone whilst the guys were waiting for me, and I came back and I interrupted Garrett mid-sentence and was like, we've got breaking news, guys, we're going to have to talk about this because we'd just done a story about the Kardashian clan, so it seemed really sort of relevant. So there is a topical element to it, but also you will hear some fun stories we get the listeners to send in their stories of their local news if they found so there was one last week which was it was from a local newspaper, and it was local leisure centre winner is Steve. That was the title of the article. And then basically the story is that this guy called Steve had won the right to rename the local leisure centre, and it was a place in Selby, and he decided to name it Selby Leisure Centre, and and that came from someone who was listening to the podcast, So we've got, if anyone comes and from here and has a listen, send us yours in, because there ain't nothing funnier than local news, I'll be honest. I found a story about a guy who had the story had been written by the Bristol Evening Post about a guy who got a hard burger from the KFC. So yeah, that's the thing. I think sometimes the world is so focused on these very divisive topics that come up. And I think our response to that has been we really don't want to remind people about how shit it is at the moment. So we don't even really talk about coronavirus, unless it's really, really necessary. But we don't talk about that because we don't need to be constantly reminded that everything's rubbish. What we need is 30 minutes of laughter each week, or more if you can manage it.
100%. Thanks loads, Jade.
Thanks for having me, Stu. I love you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jade. Thanks, Stu. And if you love hearing Stu, you're in luck because he is back again with this next chat. It's with Tova and Mike Lee talking about Till Death Do Us Pod.
Okay, Tova, Mike, tell us all about your podcast, please.
Yeah, you pointing at me. Why are you pointing? See,
You're better explaining it. That's
this
why.
basically sums our relationship up. You do it.
Yeah.
So our podcast is called Till Death Do Us Pod, and it's basically a weekly podcast where we chat about anything. I don't know why we seem to be very big in parenting categories, but actually talk very little about parenting.
Big in Estonia, I think.
Big in Estonia.
I think we're number one in Estonia.
Yes.
So all you Estonians out there, thank you. Thank you very much to the Tallinn posse.
I know. I really hope people don't tune in to get parenting advice from our podcast.
That would be quite a worry.
Yes, quite a worry. We decided to do a podcast together because, well, you do a lot of podcasts without me, and I was jealous.
Yeah, I've got a podcast company called Playback Media. We do mainly sport, mainly football stuff. So I had a sort of background in it, but it bizarrely, it did kind of be, you know, you both work from home and you're both busy, both self-employed. It kind of was the only 1 hour a week without the kids that we actually get to talk to each other.
Yeah. And before the pandemic, it was nice because we used to actually go into central London to a studio and record the podcast and then combine it with a nice sort of meal.
Spot a lunch.
A nice meal.
Yeah.
I did see you it was sort of kind of framed as an unofficial date night.
Yes.
Pretty much.
It really was. It really was. And now it's not anymore.
But it's kind of evolved. I mean, in fairness, it has evolved. There's a lot of sort of humorous episodes, and we've had some really serious episodes with some we did a big thing over International Women's Month.
Yes, well, it was International Women's Day, but we made it a whole month.
We made a whole month.
And we featured lots of amazing women. I think what it was, at some point we realized we have run out of things to say. So getting guests on just took the pressure off. Yeah. And then we realized that, oh my God, there are some really amazing, interesting people out there. And we kind of fell in love with the whole idea of interviewing people and having guests on.
And I think why that works with the guests, I think they're not used to being interviewed in the way we interview them.
Yes, which is very badly.
Very, very unprofessional. Semi-professional.
This is when you're meant to be selling your podcast to listeners.
Well, you know, what can you do? Not kidding anybody. So we had people like Jacqueline Gold, who was amazing.
Yes.
We had the
Mandu Reid, leader of the Women's Equality Party recently.
So some really very, very interesting guests.
Yes.
That you sort of probably wouldn't, why would you talk to them otherwise type thing? Not in a bad way, but why would you come across and go, come on this show?
There has been a very interesting range of people, haven't there?
Yeah.
Really, really
it has. So it's sort of...
So anyway, it's amazing. So listen to our podcast.
Yeah. Every week. It's really about half an hour. It's a very easy listen in the car or whatever you're doing at home.
When you decided that you was going to do a podcast, how did you settle on the format of it?
It's still a work in progress. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah, we're on the third kind of version of.
Oh yeah, totally. I feel like that's the thing. Okay, if you're going to listen to our podcast, you need to change. Okay? Yeah, you can't just one thing. No, it started as the format was just us chatting, and we had topics and we wanted to do regular things occurring. So one of the things we sometimes do is discuss what Mike has bought during the week, because
normally at Amazon. Working from home, I can't get away with the noise of another package of crap coming through the door. What have you bought now? Oh, well, whatever it might be.
Yeah, so we discussed Mike's purchases, but then that kind of became boring, so I stopped doing that. And now we do interviews. Now we talk to interesting people. We usually play a game, a sort of an icebreaker with people, which is a lot of fun, especially if your guest is super serious, because they don't see that coming. And that's worked really well, right? We've discovered new things about each other, which I was personally very impressed about, because we've been married for 10 years and I thought, that's it. We know everything. You discovered I applied for the Israeli...
Oh, yes. Pop Idol.
Yeah, Pop Idol.
Which I literally found this out last week. I was like, what?
Just casually drop that in.
The Israeli version.
Did I not know?
I was in shock, and I was like, there's got to be footage of this. And she went into it quite seriously. It wasn't like you go with your mates, you've had a few drinks, you're queuing up to see the Israeli version of Simon Cowberg. I don't know. No, I mean, it was you kind of, went for it, you thought you could sing.
I really did. I was nearly 30 at the time.
You can't even blame youth.
Yeah.
Incredible. There we are. So it's full of nuggets.
Did we answer your question? No.
I think so. So how did, the last sort of year worth of sort of pandemic, how did that affect the podcast?
Well, they went on for longer because we had nothing else to do, I think. It's a 4-hour special.
Yes.
Oh, God, no. I don't think it sort of changed it at all.
Really.
I mean, not really, because we were doing them pretty regularly.
To be honest,
anyway.
if anything, I think what happened, because everybody started doing Zooms, you suddenly realized, oh my God, we can have guests from overseas.
Yeah.
And suddenly we're
Easy
talking
to
people from Australia. We talked to Mel Corelli from season 6 of Married at First Sight Australia, which was an amazing episode.
Which was our guilty pleasure during lockdown 3.
It was so much fun.
Quite extraordinary show.
And we talked to lots of people in the States, and we're having other guests from Australia coming on. So I think that it kind of opened our kind of horizons to, we can have guests from all over the world and not just from London.
Yeah, that made a difference, because the problem before, when you're getting people to go into the studio in central London, podcasts, how they work financially, they don't. It's very difficult to then get people in and do this and give up time. So it has sort of opened up the guests, and therefore opened up the topics we can sort of discuss.
I absolutely agree. I think it's been like a really exciting time for podcasting. Obviously, taking nothing away from the awfulness of the pandemic, but I do think that so many people that, like you say, you was never going to be able to go, are you all right to get into London today for this bracket of 2 hours in this studio? Whereas,
we just want 5 minutes with you.
Yeah, and now it's like you're right to just jump on Zoom, and all of a sudden, I think it's just absolutely transformed the way that so many people podcast. I think it's great. I mean, when as we see ourselves coming out of this pandemic, do you think you'll go back to the original way that you recorded, or do you think you're sort of
probably not? I don't think so. I don't see I mean, you like the going out aspect.
I mean,
you like the dinner afterwards.
I do. I like the dinner afterwards. But I also think that one of the reasons we did it in the way that we did was because you were recording in the studio anyway.
Yeah, I was there anyway.
Because for his other podcast. So it was it made sense. But yeah, maybe a combination of both a little bit.
I think speaking to other podcast people, I'd say it's kind of 50-50. Some people are quite wary about coming in.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who record outside London who are coming in have now gone, why am I coming in and paying that train fare and all that? So they don't want to. I think the quality of podcasts, we were talking about podcast setups and all that, have got much easier, much cheaper over the years, whereby you can get some pretty good stuff for next to nothing. So I think that's made a big difference. So I think that sort of the smoke and mirrors of the studio and the studio costs and all that, I think that's going to affect studios. I know people who've got voiceover studios in central London, and obviously more and more people have just had to do home setups and are doing them pretty well.
That's something that would be nice to do. We're thinking of getting one of those garden offices / bar.
I recommend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And have the little booth there for podcasts, for recording.
And one of the other things that we're seeing evolving hugely in podcasting is live shows on stage. Is that something you'd consider?
You've done live recordings.
I've done quite a few, and we were doing the monthly until lockdown. So they work. It's really, really good for this particular one.
Yeah, why not?
Why not? I can't see why not, really.
I know people who are doing actual tours, so we would do it.
Yeah, no, it kind of works well. We started doing them a long, long time ago with a podcast, doing the Angelos and Barry from Watford and Angelos podcast years ago now, and it was great. It was to
be honest, any excuse to get us out the house.
I think that's the case now. I think once things ease, I think anyone wants to start putting dates in the diary and go, great, that we listened to that show, let's go, they're doing a podcast thing. And I think that whole kind of meet and greet and getting to meet people and all that, I think it's really nice. It's like a radio show, isn't it? It's like going to a radio recording. It's a nice different thing to go and do for people.
Absolutely. And lastly, what else can people expect from the podcast coming their way?
So lots of changes. We really can't tell you what it's going to be like in 6 months. But for the next few weeks, we've got some amazing guests coming on. We've got Rose McGowan, obviously actress and an activist. We've got a great episode coming out with pastor turned stripper.
Oh, yes.
And I am mortified that I can't think of her name right now, but it's an amazing episode. We've got like some great guests. This week is a special for No Diet Day, and we're talking to Rena O'Connor and Harriet, aka Toby and Rue, about body image. So the variety of topics we touch about are just, they're out there. And if you like interesting people, silly conversations with interesting people, that's our podcast, I think.
Wonderful. Mike, Toba, thank you so much.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Boom. Good work, Stu, once again. And thanks to Mike and Tova for that. They've been releasing loads of episodes with that, and it is very entertaining. Let's finish things up for this episode by speaking to our final guest of the week. I had a lovely time talking to the one and only Tom Kerridge, superstar chef, and also the broadcaster, podcaster, just all-round great guy, Chris Stark. Chris and Tom have started a brand new podcast called The Pirate Ship, and we're going to hear all about it right now. All right, it's time for another Pod Bible podcast, and today I am joined by Tom Kerridge and Chris Stark from The Pirate Ship. How are you guys?
Yes. Super cool. Thank you very much.
What is your podcast about?
So it's the Pirate Ship podcast, and it was a conversation that me and Chris had. So we're good mates. So we live not too far from each other, and Chris is a big kind of like foodie fan. He does know a lot about food. He does enjoy eating. He does like being around that kind of environment. He is quite knowledgeable about it, even though he kind of pretends all he eats is pizza and lasagna. There is a little bit. There is a little bit more to him than that. And I love going on Radio 1. So we've known each other for quite a while, and we were chatting about foodie podcasts, and quite often, and I've done loads of food podcasts, but they're always a little bit food magazine-y, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that's great, and that market space is brilliant, and you talk about recipes and food, and it's for that foodie market. However, we wanted to do something that was a little bit more, we describe it as it's a podcast for people that eat rather than foodies. So it covers and ticks so many boxes, and it doesn't matter whether you like food or not like food, which, is one of the big features in the show. But we just try and make sure that it's just everything that can be around food, emotions about it, first dates, experiences, restaurants, favorite food. And then there might be recipes in it. There might not be. There might be things that we talk about. We talk about kitchen experiences, talk about my life and bits and bobs as a chef and things that we've had. And then Chris interacts with kind of from a restaurant goer and somebody who likes eating out, but it's not about eating out in posh places. It's about doing all sorts of everything to do with eating is probably the best way to describe it.
Wow. Okay. So it's for people who like food. So that's amazing to start off with. You're literally targeting everyone.
Not even that. It's for people who like eating. It's
people who like eating.
Yeah, mate. I would say I'd go as far as to hope that this podcast is the first ever food podcast for people that don't even necessarily like food. Everyone has to eat.
It's true.
But, we have a section on the podcast where people try foods for the first time. And I love it so much because people are willing to do stuff for this podcast and willing to get involved with some of our fun. And, for example, try foods for the first time. Some people might listen to it and go, how have you never eaten a banana ever in your life? And people go try it and they gag and they hate it 9 times out of 10. Maybe 1 in 10 actually find that they love a new thing in life, which is great. But yeah, I think Tom's got it bang on there, which is, we're good friends, and Tom wanted to make a podcast, and actually we just wanted a podcast that reflects our personalities. So if you like me and Tom and you like the idea of us loosely chatting about food, this is the podcast for you.
Perfect. So, Tom, I can see just having a scroll through the episode list before this, you've already had some pretty amazing guests. Could you tell our listeners who might not have heard it yet who you've had and who you might have coming up?
We've had Roman Kemp, we've had Scarlett Moffat, we've had Richard Madeley. I mean, he was to be honest, you go, Richard Madeley on a food podcast, what's he going to talk about? you want to know Richard Madeley's Sunday lunch? It was an exceptional. I've learned how to make things with Richard Madeley. It was amazing, brilliant stories.
Great.
Highlight for me was we recorded the interview slightly differently because we were doing it at different time zones. We were ringing into LA and we were hanging out talking about food and Staffordshire oatcakes with Robbie Williams, and that was pretty cool.
Wow.
It was great, and it was brilliant. To chat with Robbie Williams about food it was quite good fun, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah, it was great. I think what's lovely about this is, and when we set out to do this, we don't need guests on this podcast. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, we can bring friends in on it, and because it's our first series, it's a nice way of bringing people in. And I've really enjoyed it because Tom's right. When you ask Richard Madeley what his signature dish is, and this has become one of my favourite questions with people that we have on the podcast, what is this one signature dish that you'll go make? So with Roman Kemp, it's like, what's the meal you use when you're trying to impress a date? And you can ask this to anyone, but Richard Madeley's answer was one of my highlights of the series because it was full Richard Madeley. And I think that's what I love about this is, we do have guests on this podcast, but it's been really nice bringing them into our world. And generally speaking, they're just mates of ours. So it's just a nice excuse to bring them in on our nonsense.
Fantastic. So I'm guessing that this came about, Tom, when you were, everybody's been stuck at home. You haven't been as busy as you traditionally would have been before the pandemic and all that kind of stuff. How have the pair of you found doing this over the internet? I'm guessing you haven't had any plans to meet up and do this face to face.
No, we've met up. We've done some of it, over Zoom, but okay. I was really adamant that as soon as we could, that we should be in person. And
Right.
Tom's got a great pub and restaurants, and I think that's what this podcast needed to be based in. And it's what a lot of people were missing when we started as well. People were missing being in that environment. And I think what's been lovely is we've had so many messages from people that feel that listening to us is a bit like being back in the pub. And that's been really important. And so, yeah, it's been lovely actually being able to see Tom in person. We pretend it's work, and that's how we can get away with it. And the truth is it's not work at all.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, during lockdown, I think I was invited on and did loads of podcasts for different people. I'm sure you guys and Chris was the same. We've all done bits and bobs of podcasts. However, this wasn't done out of being in lockdown. This was something that we've been talking about for a while, and it just kind of not kind of coincided, but it worked quite nicely that as the restrictions were lifted, we were able to meet up. So this was planned all along, but it kind of worked out quite nicely for us that we could then hang out in the pubs, use it for a workspace, and then create this kind of content that, I mean, it's just literally it's two mates sitting down, chatting about food and going through different processes, but also having fun. Like the whole point of it is to make it a fun podcast, to make it a great crack, to make it, talk about different bits and bobs. Yes, we get guests on, but like Chris says, it's not the major point. It's a nice little, it's a nice little cherry on the top kind of thing. But the reality of I suppose, the meat and two veg of it is always about it being just two blokes having a laugh talking about food, and then we get and cocktails. Drink is another big thing, so we bring in every episode. My barman from down at the Hand of Flowers creates a cocktail for somebody who wants a special occasion or something to do, or they're having barbecue with their mates over, they want something a little bit interesting. So Fro turns up, creates a couple of cocktails, Chris drinks them, and then has to get a taxi home.
There you go.
Fantastic. Sounds like a great gig you've got here, Chris. Sounds absolutely fantastic.
That's the wonderful thing. And I always say this to people whenever, because, anyone can make a podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer in just make a podcast what you would find fun. And that's what we've done. Like Tom and I, we could have gone about this in a totally different way. We could have got other people involved in it. We could have done anything we wanted, actually. And what we both settled on that we wanted to do was just make a podcast which was fun for us. And that's ultimately what we've gone and done.
Yeah. Cool.
There's so much for us to explore because it's not just about the world of food and nice restaurants to eat at. There's so many different things. And Chris is an amazing ideas man. He's got brilliant ideas of funny little bits and bobs that could be 30 seconds long or could be 10 minutes long of conversations and ideas that all are related to. It is around food, but actually it's about human beings. It's about people and it's about having fun, that food just appears to be a part of it. And there's so much ground to go over. There's so much scope. So yeah, it feels like it's something that could just keep going forever and ever and ever. It feels like it's super good fun to do. And
yeah, Tom's right. And the thing is with food and drink is when you think about it, it sort of runs through so many different areas of life. So you go to a festival, you eat, there's food there and there's great stories from where we've all gone to festivals. On holiday, it's really a podcast where, yes, food is maybe the base of a lot of what we're talking about, but really it's the applications of it rather than the food itself. It's those moments in your life. It's those life experiences that we've both been exploring. And we've met amazing people. Like we had this grandma on and she's just decided to set up a little kitchen. I think it's in Bradford, out of a terrace house, right? And she has made what is now being regarded as the best full English breakfast in the whole of the UK. People are turning up to her little house and she's serving them out the kitchen window. It's amazing stories like that I feel that this podcast could uncover if we were to get into a second series. And everyone's got a favourite little place, a little nugget of information, there's this place that nears me that does the best ... I really want to get into some of that because there's amazing stories around the UK and we just need to keep lifting up those rocks to find them.
Incredible. Yeah, inspiring stuff. It sounds to me as if not only will you have inspired a lot of people to go and listen to your podcast now, having listened to this, but to go and make a podcast. You've talked about how easy it is, how everybody can do it, and I'm feeling inspired, and I kind of want to go and have a fry up as well after this.
Go on, Adam.
I'm going to go and make a fry up.
I think it's great, and I think if you can't be asked to make a podcast, that's all good as well. You don't have to. Don't feel you have to make a podcast. I know the world can make you feel like that. You don't have to. But come get involved with ours. If it sounds like the kind of thing that might be of interest, feed in. As Tom says, we go through so many ideas, and I feel sometimes, Tom's a big businessman as well, and I'm there suggesting see-through toasty machines. But you never know, we might just stumble upon one of these ideas is going to be the one, I'm convinced of it. So if you're listening and you think you've got ideas, feed them into this podcast.
Incredible.
I'm like a really rubbish Alan Sugar with Chris. We go, that's a good idea. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's have a go. Let's make a clear see-through toaster. I'm still trying to work out how it doesn't melt yet, but we haven't quite got there yet, have we, Chris?
No, we haven't, mate. But this is what I love about working with Tom is I think I'm the kind of person that has a few drinks in a pub. We all come up with these ideas. And what most of us do is wake up the next day, get on with our lives, get on with jobs, college, whatever, and just go and you don't really revisit it. You go, that was just a drunken idea. I've started in my life to go, well, actually, those are good ideas. It's just the next day you wake up and life takes priority. And what I want to start doing is trying to make some of these ideas happen. What's amazing in Tom is I found a bloke that doesn't really say no. He always says yes at the start.
Yeah.
And I'm certain that one of these ideas from the podcast is going to change the world forever. I just don't know what it is yet.
Is because I don't drink, right? So I don't forget. I don't wake up in the morning having forgotten a daft idea. I wake up in the morning going, that's a brilliantly daft idea. Let's just do it. And then you have to remind Chris and he goes, I said, what? Oh, yeah. All right. Okay. We're doing what? We're building a clear plastic see-through toaster. Okay.
Right, okay, so this is definitely something for our listeners to keep an eye out on. Not only do they need to listen to this podcast, but they need to keep an eye out on the shelves. There's going to be a clear plastic toaster at some point.
Yeah, maybe.
There has to be now. You've really bigged it up. I'm really intrigued and I want to try it.
The idea is out in the world. That's what we do. We throw these ideas out into the world. If you're part of our podcast, you will benefit in the long run.
Fantastic. All right. Well, listeners, go and have a listen to The Pirate Ship. As you can tell, Tom and Chris clearly have great chemistry and get on very well. So that's half the fun of podcasts most of the time anyway. So thanks very much, Tom and Chris, for coming on.
Nice one, Adam.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you to Tom and to Chris, and of course to Mike and to Tova and to Jade Adams and to Stu for chipping in with a couple of interviews this week, and to everybody for listening. Of course, it'd be remiss of me if I didn't mention the brand new issue of Pod Bible once more, issue 16. This one crept up on us. It came around pretty quickly, right? But yeah, we're back with another issue. All of our back issues, if you want to go and read the interview we did with James and Ed from Off Menu, if you want to read interviews with Adam Buxton, Richard Herring, The Receipts, Ramesh Ranganathan, Chris and Rosie Ramsey, Deborah Francis White. Oh my gosh, we've spoken to loads of people. The Corrupt FM boys. We've had loads of people on our covers. Then podbiblemag.com is the place to be. We've got extra reviews, recommendations, and interviews on there as well. And you can also sign up to our weekly newsletter. It goes out every Wednesday to over 10,000 podcast fans, listeners, people in the industry. So if you're not signed up to that, what are you doing? Get signed up ASAP at podbiblemag.com. info@podbiblemag.com is our email address, @podbible on social media. If you've got a podcast that you feel deserves to be spoken about and hasn't yet featured on the podcast or in the magazine, then get in touch. And until next time, in a couple of weeks, when we'll be back with episode 89, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I hope it's not as windy where you are as it is where I am. And hopefully I'll be back in a couple of weeks if the office hasn't blown away. Thanks a lot. Speak to you soon.